Hey everyone, and welcome to the final lecture in our SQL section. So far, we've looked at how to explore the data inside of a database, how to extract the required data using the select, from, and where statements, as well as performing joins between our tables and performing some basic analysis and manipulation of the data using functions. Now that we've got our data prepared and selected, the next step is to transfer it over into Excel or Python for further analysis. Of course, sometimes the analysis that we carry out in SQL may be sufficient, but for any visualizations or more in-depth analysis, then we'd be better off using other tools. So here we are inside of SQL Server Management Studio. Let's say that we want to export all of this data from the query that we made in the last lecture, so that we can get it into either Excel or Python to analyze further. Doing this is actually super simple. All we'll need to do is right-click anywhere from within our results window, and from here, there's an option called Save Results As. Before we do this though, we'll just need to make one change to how our data is exported. Currently, our column headings will be ignored, but we can change this from up here within the Tools drop-down menu. From here, we'll need to go to Options, Query Results, SQL Server, Results to Grid, and from this menu, we'll just tick this box here, which is to include column headers when copying or saving results. Nice one. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut now while I restart Management Studio. I've now restarted SQL Server Management Studio, so the change that we just made will now have been applied. Let's now go back to our Save Results option, and then we can just choose a name for our exported file and where we want to save it to. I'll just call mine a SQL export, and I'll save it to the folder for this section. Okay, perfect. So if I open this folder up, we'll see that there's a file in here called SQL export.csv, which if we open it up, we'll see contains all of the results and data that we had from our query. And all that we need to do now is load this into either Excel or Python in just the same way that we've done before. In Python, we just use the pd.readcsv function, and then from here, we can just carry out our data cleaning, analysis, and visualization using all of the techniques, tips, and tricks that we've learned throughout the course. Which, as an example here, I'll just make a quick bar plot to have a look at the average year-to-date sales by the group. Before we finish this lecture, I'd just like to show you another way that we can get data out of our SQL databases and into Python or Excel, and that is just to connect directly to our database instead. I hardly ever use this method, as it's much quicker and easier to just export the data from SQL to a CSV file and load it in that way. But there may be times when you want to query the SQL Server directly. To do this in Excel is actually pretty easy. From within the Data tab, we have an option for Getting Data. We've looked at this briefly in our introduction sections to Excel, but one of the options in here is to get data from a SQL Server database, which I'll go ahead and select. This then prompts us for some different pieces of information. The server, which is the name of our SQL Server, which for us will just be our PC host name, so we can copy and paste this in from command prompt like we did before. And then as an optional argument, we have the database. If you've got multiple databases in your SQL Server, then it's a good idea to supply this. We've only got one, but I'll pass it in anyway, and it's just called AdventureWorks 2022. Finally, we've got some advanced options where you can actually pass in a SQL query to choose which data we want to select. I'll copy over the query that we've been using, and then we can just paste it in here like so. I'll leave everything else as default and click OK. This will then run the SQL query we provided and pull all of that data into Excel automatically. To do this in Python, we have the read SQL query function, which is available in pandas. There's never been a time where I've needed to use this, but it's still worthwhile knowing, just in case you ever do need to use it. To pull SQL data directly into Python, we'll need to use pandas, but then also something called PyoDBC, which is an open source Python module that provides us with an interface to connect to ODBC databases. We'll then need to define our connection string, which needs 4 different pieces of information. The first of these is the driver, which I've set as ODBC driver 17 for SQL Server. Bear in mind though, that this could change as things get updated, but for now, this will work. If you've got any issues with it though, then just have a read through the latest documentation. Then we need to provide the server, which is just the PC name again, the database that we're connecting to, and finally, we'll say that this is a trusted connection. The trusted connection part just indicates that Windows authentication should be used in order to connect to our database. And then here, I just initiate or create the connection using the connection function from PyoDBC. Here, I specified the SQL query that we want to execute, which is the same one from before. And also, because our query spans multiple lines, instead of single quotes, I've wrapped it in triple quotes, which is what enables this to span across multiple lines. Finally, we can then just run the pd.read SQL query function with our SQL query and connection string passed in as arguments. And I then just assign the result of this to a variable called df. Closing the connection is then an important but optional step in managing the database and system resources. So always try to include this. And at the bottom, we've then just got the contents of our data frame. So these are the 2 main ways in which we can get data from SQL into Python and Excel. I always prefer to export the data to CSV instead of connecting directly because I find it much quicker and easier, but feel free to use whichever option works best for you. Okay, and with that, we've now finished our section on our introduction and overview section on SQL. Like usual, if you've got any questions about any of this, then please let me know in the Q&A section below. Great job everyone, and I'll see you all in the next section.